This is Twit.
Let's start out with the RTX 2080 Super, which you are calling a less super, which leads me to suspect that where the 26 Super, the 2060 Super is a 2070, the 2070 Super is basically a 2080. The 2080 Super is just a tiny bit better than a 2080.
Yeah,
a tiny bit.
Okay, in fairness, and so far I had been testing the Founders Edition cards, and of note, NVIDIA is not charging any more for those with the Super cards. So instead of the $100 premium for a Founders Edition, where the RTX 2080 was $799, now it's only $699, which is the same price as all the stock cards. But comparing those, the 2070 Super was about 10%-ish shy of a 2080. So we're like, oh, wow, what if the 2080 Super is like within 10% of a 2080 Ti, which is $1,000 plus graphics card. The Founders Edition of that card is $1,199. So it's like the $500 difference there is so great. Is it even possible? And maybe it's using the same GPU, because the GPU that's in the RTX 2070 Super and 2080 is the same. That's why they're so similar. And it's the TU104. And that chip is also in the 2080 Super. So how much further could you go with TU104 than you already were with the 2080? And it turns out there were a grand total of 2 streaming multiprocessors. I think that's what it's called. SMs, I'm forgetting. But that only raises your CUDA core count from 2944 to 3072. And it raises everything else up a little. No, it's not a lot. It raises everything up a little bit. Texture units are now 192 instead of 184. Same number of ROPs, because it's 64 ROPs on that GPU. So then they increased clocks. So it's the highest stock clocks we've seen so far from Turing. So 1815 megahertz, which is way up from 1710 with the RTX 2080. So you're basically getting a 2080 with that last little bit of the TU104 unlocked, about 105 megahertz overclock, or and much faster memory. They increased the memory speed to their fastest GDDR6 speed so far, which is 15.5 versus 14 gigabit per second, the data rate. So very fast memory, which makes the memory bandwidth almost 500 gigabytes a second.
Right.
TDP is up to 250 watts. So all of these things, like, okay, it has more power handling capability. It's got the rest of the GPU completely unlocked, and they bumped up the clocks. So all of this translates into, versus the 2080 Founders Edition, about 5%. 5% faster.
I'm
not within
really
5% of the 2080 Ti, but just 5% faster.
So it really is super in name only.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm trying to justify like why this even has to exist, and I guess if you think of it as a price drop, because it could be thought of as simply a price drop, not because the 2080 was any more expensive than $699 for a stock card, but because the Founders Edition was $799. So now, instead of just saying, hey, we've lowered the price of the Founders Edition to $699, and you don't get anything more out there from board partners because they already have the same GPU, then I guess that's less compelling than if I said, hey, here's a 5 to 6% performance increase, because they were talking 6% over a stock, 5% over the Founders Edition, and I found that to be pretty much the case. So it's 5 or 6% faster, same price. And in the case of the Founders Edition, $100 less. So if you like the Founders Edition card, which it has a very nice cooler on it, it's very efficient. It's got Chrome on it now. But of course, as I knock my microphone over, they're nice coolers. They're quiet. It's just after the excitement of 2060 gets you a 2070 now if you get the Super, and then 2070 Super is almost all the way to a 2080, and then this is like 5% faster. So you can look through any of the reviews out there, including mine, and see about that increase. I did all my testing I did it all over again, all on the newest drivers, and just doing 1440 Ultra, which pretty punishing in some of these games where we're only getting like the two cards out of a list in a single title might get 60 frames per second in some of these games like Metro Exodus or Assassin's Creed Odyssey. So they're tough tests of the GPU trying to eliminate CPU bottlenecks, but it's still not. It's fast enough to play 1440 Ultra by easily in most games, but you're not really gaming at 4K high settings with this card. If you are interested in 4K, you're still going to have to get a 2080 Ti, and it's still $500 more. So that's disappointing.
I mean, it's also, and this is kind of like I'm looking at the World of Tanks benchmark just because it happened to be in front of me, but you look at these numbers and it's, the 2070 Super is running, 6 or 7 frames behind, either practically the same, within a couple frames or maybe a max of, 2 frames, 6 frames. The average frames per second is about 6 frames different. The RTX 2080, it's maybe, 2 frames per second faster. The RTX 2080 Super, well, it's about 10 frames per second faster on average. So that's healthy. Yeah. But I don't think anybody's going to go from a 1080 Ti to or an RTX 2080 to a 2080 Super. You know what I mean? Is buying a brand new card at that price point worth an extra 10 frames per second? Probably not for the vast majority of people, especially when you look at the Founders Edition, which has a significantly, or I should say the 2080 Ti Founders Edition, which has a much bigger delta.
And that's just one. I mean, it depends on the game. And the one really weird result was I finally added at least one Vulkan benchmark. And if you look at the World War Z results, that paints a very different picture of all these graphics cards. There's 12 cards in this group, and with World War Z using the Vulkan API, suddenly, even though the Ti is still on top, the Radeon 7 isn't too far behind, and then the RX 5700 XT is right behind it. And one of the things I discovered in this review was that the 5700 XT is really close to a Radeon 7 in a lot of instances where it just doesn't make sense to spend $700 on a Radeon 7 when you're getting that much for $400. And that again kind of questions the $700 2080 Super, because it's a little bit faster than the 2080, just a little bit. Still $700. And coming up on the heels of the $700 Radeon 7 is this really fast RX 5700 XT. So I don't know if NVIDIA did enough, or maybe this card will be coming down in price once the bigger Navi card comes out, because these $100 increments are nice, like $399 for very good performance, $499 for even better performance. What if this card was $599 and would just decimate Radeon 7, of course, price, performance, and overall performance, but then there's no reason for them to do that yet, I guess is what I'm saying, because Radeon 7 is still $700. And that's the only card outside of some Vulkan benchmarks that can even come close to this, and it's still not beating it in most like DX12 and DX11 benchmarks. So,
yeah. I mean, also, I hear the Vulkan numbers, and I think this is also a case where NVIDIA is, had a lot of money for a lot of years, as working with a lot of developers to maximize the performance on their platform. And I wonder if I wonder if that's going to change over the next 12 to 18 months in any meaningful way. You also got to look at EVGA's RTX 2080 Super FTW3. I almost said something else.
It's the one with the liquid. You can kind of see it behind me. I have the liquid cooler propped up on this headphone stand right now, but it's an interesting card because it's their completely overbuilt, outrageous FTW PCB. So it's not a stock card at all. It's over an inch taller PCB with their own, VRMs and stuff, and it's made for overclocking. The problem is, we talked about the clock speeds at the top, and they were already pushing 105 megahertz faster than RTX 2080 with the 2080 Super. So how much room is there left to go? And even this overbuilt card with an all-in-one liquid cooler on the core and a blower cooler for the VRMs and the memory is still only clocked 30 megahertz faster out of the box. So I ran the OC scanner tool and had pumped up the power limit. The power limit on this card is huge. It's 130%. So ran OC scanner and still only got a plus 41 score. I ran it, I think the second time I ran it, I got closer to 44, but I was thinking that was a plus 45 anyway, because Turing moves in 15 megahertz increments. So it's 15, 30, 45. And plus 45 is, you have to add that to the 30 megahertz out of the box. Now we're talking about, 75 megahertz overclock, which is pretty good. I, of course, pushed it as far as I could. I got plus 90 megahertz on the core stable in all the games I was running. And that's a total of 120 megahertz overclocked out of the box. But GPU Boost 4.0, it does its own thing. It's looking at power, it's looking at thermals, and it's adjusting the boost speed accordingly. And even though I had the clock set, I think the boost clock was set to something like 1950. After my overclock was over, it was actually running closer to 2.1 gigahertz. It was like 2100 megahertz that would eventually dip down to like 2085 after a while. But this card did a really good job of sustaining those boost frequencies. However, even with clock speeds of over 2 gigahertz, getting everything I could possibly get out of TU-104 with this beefier, better cooled card, still the benchmark results are even more underwhelming than they were with the actual super review. We're talking 1 to 3% faster. Overclocked.
So $100 extra, a little bit less than that if you buy it with the current rebate. Very stylish, very liquid cooled. No meaningful performance improvement over a stock card in a proper air cooled case.
Yeah, the only reason I would recommend a card like this is if you were looking at a 2080 Super and you're in a thermally constrained kind of environment, and I'll be looking at a case soon. It's the LDO3 from Silverstone, which is compact. It's all glass all around it. In those really small glass cases where you don't have a lot of front intake, you're going to be choking out a lot of graphics cards, and they don't personally recommend even going up past like a 2070 necessarily with that card. It depends on the style. They were like, please use a blower cooler. Well, with something like this, you can use whatever GPU you want, because as long as you've got a 120 millimeter fan mount, then you're probably actually keeping the GPU cool enough under load. But that's pretty much it. Like, you need to have a special use case to require this kind of cooling, because I think they're getting pretty much everything they can get out of this GPU. So some of these hefty, like out of the box overclock cards you're going to see, like, you're going to be paying a premium for a card that might have a 75 megahertz overclock tops out of the box. And, I think the ones I've seen so far listed, the highest one I saw was maybe 60 megahertz overclock, like a 1885 megahertz out of the box. So it's not much. And you'd be paying a lot more for 1 to 2%, maybe 3% faster performance. So long story short, they've squeezed as much as they can out of TU-104, and you don't really need anything faster than the Founders Edition card, which is the same price as any of the stock cards you're going to see out there at $699.